How many times in your life have you found yourself doing something, not because it was what you truly believed in, but because the voice of someone else spoke louder than your own? Think about it for a moment. Maybe it was a friend's suggestion, a family member's expectation, or even the overwhelming roar of societal norms. Perhaps it was something as simple as wearing clothes you don't like just because someone said they look good on you, or choosing a career path because it seemed more acceptable in the eyes of others. These seemingly small decisions can add up and eventually become your life story, one that was never truly yours to begin with. When was the last time you did something solely because it felt right to you? It's easy to lose sight of who we are amidst all the noise around us. Take the case of a young artist I once knew. He was passionate about painting, about colors and expressions that spoke of his world. But his parents, well-meaning as they were, urged him towards a more stable career in finance. He tried to balance both, squeezing in his art when he could. But over time, the voices telling him to be practical drowned out his inner voice that whispered, "Create." Eventually, he let the paintbrushes gather dust. He became a successful accountant. But there was a heaviness in his smile, a faint shadow of what done. You see, this isn't a unique story. You might have your own version of it. We let others guide us because as humans we crave acceptance. We fear being left behind or standing out for the wrong reason. There's a deep-seated desire to fit in, to blend with the crowd because standing alone can feel uncomfortable, almost as if the ground beneath you could give way at any moment. So we let others dictate what we should think, what we should do. The moment we let someone else's voice drown out our own, we surrender a piece of our freedom. That freedom isn't just the liberty to do as you please. It's the freedom to be who you are. To wake up every morning and know that the choices you make are yours, not dictated by someone else's dreams, insecurities, or expectations. When I ask people why they let others steer their lives, I often hear things like, "It's just easier," or "I didn't want to upset anyone." But what about upsetting yourself? What about betraying your own sense of who you are? Isn't that a heavier price to pay? You may think you're just being agreeable, but in reality, you're silencing your own voice, your own desires. You're handing over the reins of your life piece by piece until one day you wake up wondering whose life you're actually living. Imagine yourself on a path, but every few steps, someone else comes in nudging you left or right. After a while, you're no longer walking your own way. You're being pulled in so many directions that you lose sight of where you even wanted to go in the first place. And at that point, who's in control? Not you. Not really. So what's the solution? It's not about disregarding everyone's advice or shutting people out. No, it's about listening to your own voice, weighing your choices based on what aligns with your truth. It's about standing firm, not out of stubbornness, but out of a deep sense of respect for yourself. When others speak louder, learn to speak up, not to them, but to yourself. Learn to say, "I hear you, but this is my choice. This is my life." Freedom starts in those small moments when you choose to honor your own thoughts, your own feelings, despite what anyone else says. Because true freedom isn't given, it's claimed. And it's not something you get once and keep forever. It's something you must practice day by day, choice by choice. Stop, yet, on the same pure wise is the loudest in your life, right? And if it isn't yours, what can you do to reclaim that space? Because your voice matters. It deserves to be heard, not just by others, but by you. When you give yourself the permission to lead, to choose, to simply be, you'll find that your path, whatever it looks like, is one that brings a deep, authentic fulfillment that no one else's approval could ever match. Have you ever stopped to think about how many of your decisions are truly your own? We like to believe we're independent thinkers, free to choose our own path, but the reality is that influence is everywhere, creeping into our thoughts, shaping our choices. It's like a gentle breeze, sometimes barely noticeable, yet powerful enough to steer the course of our lives if we're not careful. From the moment we're born, we're influenced. Our families instill their values in us, telling us what's right and wrong, what's acceptable and what's not. As children, we learn to absorb and follow these messages because, well, our parents know best, right? But as we grow, this influence doesn't just disappear. It changes form. It might come from friends, peers, teachers, and even strangers. It could be as blatant as a friend pushing you to take a sip of that drink at a party, or as subtle as a comment like, "You're so much smarter than that." Why would you waste your potential on a job like that? And it's not just people. It's society as a whole, what's considered normal, what's considered success. Think about how media portrays the ideal life. The big house, the fancy car, the perfect body. How often have you felt like you're not measuring up to those standards? Like maybe if you just worked a bit harder or made a few different choices, you could fit that image too? It's where influence becomes dangerous. It starts to blur the line between what you truly want and what you've been told you should want. I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it. Are your goals truly yours? Or are they a reflection of what someone else expects from you? I've met countless people who spent decades chasing a dream that was never really theirs. Lawyers who would rather be writers, doctors who dreamed of starting a small business, and engineers who longed to be musicians. Why didn't they follow their true passion? Because somewhere along the way, the voices around them convinced them that their dream was unrealistic, that their true desires were less important than stability or prestige. Let me share a story with you. There was a young woman I once worked with. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah grew up in a family of doctors, so naturally, she felt she had to follow that path too. Everyone admired her, praised her for being smart and responsible. He made it through medical school, but every step of the way, something felt off. She wasn't excited about it. She was going through the motions because everyone expected her to. When she finally had the courage to ask herself, "Why am I doing this?" she realized it was to make her parents proud. But when she dug deeper, she found that she never wanted this for herself. She was passionate about photography, something her family dismissed as a hobby. What happened next? It took a lot of courage, but she decided to pivot. She left her medical career behind and pursued photography full time. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but she's happy now. She feels alive and connected to what she does every single day. And here's the best part. Her family, who once doubted her decision, now sees the joy she radiates, and they support her. The point is, influence doesn't just shape our actions. It shapes our perception of what's possible. It molds the framework within which we see our life. And it happens so quietly, so naturally, that we accept it as the way things are without questioning it. Think about the goals you've set for yourself. Are they genuinely what you want, or are they what society has told you will make you happy? You see, influence is like a pair of tinted glasses. You put them on and suddenly everything looks a certain shade, but you forget you're wearing them. What you see becomes your reality. That's why it's so important to pause and take those glasses off every now and then. Is this belief mine, or did I inherit it? Does this goal excite me, or does it just sound good on paper? It's not always easy to recognize when you're being influenced, especially when it's coming from people you love or respect. You don't want to disappoint them. You don't want to be the odd one out. But here's the thing. Being aware of these influences is the first step to regaining control over your own life. When you become conscious of who or what is shaping your thoughts, you give yourself a chance to question it, to say, wait, is this really what I want? And that's powerful. Now, I'm not saying you should ignore everyone's advice or become immune to influence. No one can, and frankly, some influences are positive and can help us grow. But the key is to become aware, to decide for yourself, based on your values and desires, rather than blindly following someone else's roadmap for your life. Because if you don't take control, someone else will. And that means you end up living a life that's a shadow of what it could be. Imagine waking up one day, years down the road, and realizing that you spent your entire life trying to live up to expectations that were never yours. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? But you don't have to let that happen. You have the power to choose differently, to be more aware of who or what is steering your ship. Take a moment today, right now even, and ask yourself, what do I really want? What makes me come alive? You owe it to yourself to honor that answer, whatever it may be. Because at the end of the day, The only one who can truly define what your life should look like is you. And when you take back that power, when you decide to live according to your own truth, there's no force strong enough to pull you off course. So I encourage you to start small. Notice where you feel pressure to act a certain way or where you sense you're holding back because you're afraid of what others might think. Begin to recognize those influences. Awareness is the first step, but it's a step that can lead to profound change. Have you ever felt certain that you were in control, only to look back and realize that you were actually being influenced by things you hadn't even noticed? There's a concept called the illusion of control. It's the belief that we're making our own choices, that we're the ones in charge. But so often, that sense of control is just an illusion, something we convince ourselves of while subtle forces steer us in directions we might not have chosen if we were truly. Think about social media, for instance. Platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok were designed to connect us, but they're also masters at subtly guiding our behavior. When was the last time you scrolled through your feed and suddenly felt the need to buy something you hadn't thought of 5 minutes before? Or maybe you decided to post a picture, not because you genuinely wanted to share a moment, but because you noticed everyone else sharing theirs and didn't want to feel left out. You might think, that's just a small thing. It's not really influencing me, but these small things add up. They nudge us towards certain thoughts, feelings, and actions, all the while giving us the impression that we're the ones making the choices. And then there's FOMO, the fear of missing out. It's become so common that we almost treat it as normal. You see your friends posting pictures at a party and suddenly you feel like maybe you should be there too. You see people raving about the latest tech gadget and you start wondering if your current phone is outdated. You see posts about people starting new projects or businesses. And even if you were content before, you start questioning whether you're doing enough with your. Are these thoughts genuinely yours? Or are they just reactions to the cues you're being fed? Let me give you an example. I once met a young man who was convinced that he was living life on his own terms. He prided himself on being a free spirit, someone who didn't follow the crowd. Yet, when we dug deeper, it turned out that many of his so-called choices were actually responses to trends he'd seen online. He dressed a certain way because it was the style he saw being liked and praised on social media. He bought books that were being hyped as must-reads by influencers, even though he didn't particularly enjoy them. He was in many ways being led by the very crowd he thought he was resisting. So, when was the last time you made a decision that felt like it truly belonged to you? Not influenced by what your friends were doing, not shaped by what was trending, but something that arose from your own thoughts and desire. It's a tough question because influence is everywhere. It's in the way news is presented to us, the way products are marketed, the way success is defined. We live in a world where it's easy to believe we're free, even as we follow cues laid out for us by us. Recognizing this illusion of control is essential to breaking free from it. Because as long as you think you're the one steering the ship, you won't question the directions. You'll accept the course as your own, never realizing that you're simply being carried along by a current you didn't create. But when you start to see how these influences shape your thoughts and actions, you gain the power to pause, to question, to decide if this is truly the path you want to take. Let's look at another example, trends in lifestyles. There's a growing wave of people touting minimalism, claiming it's the key to happiness. For some, this lifestyle shift might be liberating, but for others, it's just a new standard to live up to, another way to measure themselves against others. They might declutter their homes, post pictures of their bare countertops and organize closets, feeling a sense of accomplishment. But if you ask them, why are you doing this? They might not have an answer beyond, because it's what everyone's doing. They've traded one set of expectations for another, still chasing a standard set by someone else. And it's not just about trends or social media. Think about the decisions you make every day. Are you choosing your career because it excites you or because it's what's expected? Are you living in a certain city because it feels like home or because it's where you're supposed to be? Even the food you eat, the way you spend your free time, how much of it is shaped by what you've been told is right or good? The illusion of control is powerful because it's subtle. You don't notice it until you really start paying attention. It's like being in a car that's on autopilot. You think you're driving, but the car is following a preset route. It's only when you try to turn off that part that you realize just how little control you actually have. Here's the good news, everything. Once you see the strings that are being pulled, you can decide whether you want to cut them. You can start questioning each decision, each thought that crosses your mind. Is this truly what I want? Or is it something I've been led to believe I want? It takes courage to ask that question, and even more courage to act on the answer. Breaking free from the illusion of control doesn't mean rejecting everything you've ever been influenced by. It means becoming conscious of those influences and choosing for yourself what to keep and what to let go of. It means taking a step back and observing your own behavior, your own thoughts, almost like you're watching yourself from the outside. Why am I doing this? Why does this matter to me? Is this goal, this desire, coming from a place of authenticity, or is it just something I've absorbed from others? And it's okay if you don't have all the answers right away. The point is to start questioning, start noticing. When you do that, you'll begin to see how often you're acting not out of freedom, but out of habit or expectation. You'll start to recognize when you're being nudged in a direction that doesn't feel right. And that's when real freedom begins. Not when you follow a path blindly, but when you see the path clearly and still decide to walk it, because it's what. There's no quick fix, no easy formula for breaking free from the illusion of control. It's a process, a practice of becoming more attuned to yourself and less reactive to what's going on around you. But each time you catch yourself making a decision that feels like it's not entirely your own, that's a victory. Each time you pause and say, is this really me? You're reclaiming a bit of your power. When was the last time you made a decision that felt truly, deeply yours? If it's been a while, that's okay. What matters is that you start asking now. Because the more you ask, the more you'll begin to hear your own voice amidst all the others. And when you listen to that voice, your real voice, you'll find a freedom that no illusion can take. Have you ever noticed how difficult it can be to hear yourself think when you're surrounded by noise? Not just physical noise, the blare of traffic or the hum of a crowded room, but the noise of opinions, judgments, and expectations that constantly swirl around you. It's like trying to have a conversation with yourself in the middle of a shouting match. There's so much input, so many voices telling you what you should be, should do, should want, that you lose touch with the most important voice of all, your own. So, how do you find that voice again? How do you listen to yourself amidst all the external clamor? The first step is to embrace the power of silence. And I'm not just talking about turning off your phone for a few minutes or finding a quiet spot in the park. I'm talking about real, intentional solitude, the kind where you're not just avoiding distractions, but actively creating space to hear what's going on inside. Because in that silence, you begin to differentiate between the voices of others and the one voice that truly matters to yours. Let me share a story. There was a man named John who had spent most of his life running a business that everyone in his family expected him to take over. He was good at it, made a solid living, and everyone told him he was lucky to be in such a stable position. But John felt a persistent restlessness, a quiet voice that kept whispering, "This isn't what you want." He tried to ignore it, told himself it was just a phase. Yet, the more he drowned himself in work, the louder that internal discontent became. So one day, almost on a whim, he took a leave of absence. He rented a small cabin away from the city, shut off his phone, and just sat with himself for a few days. No agenda, no distractions, just silence. The first day was uncomfortable. He kept reaching for his phone out of habit. Thoughts raced through his mind, making it difficult to sit still. But slowly, as the hours turned into days, a strange thing happened. He began to hear himself clearly for the first time in years. He realized he'd been suppressing a desire to paint, something he hadn't done since college. It didn't mean he was going to become a full-time artist, but reconnecting with that part of himself. The part he'd silenced for so long gave him clarity. He returned to his business with a new perspective, more connected to his own needs and less concerned with others' expectations. John's story isn't unique. So many people go through life with that quiet, unsettled feeling, never realizing that what they're longing for isn't more success or more approval. It's more of themselves. But finding that can be challenging, especially when we're so used to filling every moment with activity or the opinions of others. Can I tell the difference between my voice and the voices of others? It's a crucial question because the line can blur easily. You might think you're choosing a certain career, a particular relationship, or even a way of living because it's what you want. But are you sure? Or could it be that you're still carrying around the voices of a parent who told you what a real job looks like, or a friend who set an example you feel pressured to follow? This is why spending time alone, real quality time, is so important. Not just 5 minutes here or there, but dedicated time where you step away from everyone else's input and just sit with yourself. It's not about isolating yourself from the world. It's about giving yourself the chance to reconnect with what's inside of you. When was the last time you took a long walk by yourself without music or a podcast playing in your room? When did you last sit with a notebook and write, not for anyone else, but just to capture what's going on in your own mind? There's a reason why so many people, when faced with big decisions or times of crisis, instinctively feel the need to step back, to retreat into solitude. Because in that space, away from the noise, you can finally hear yourself again. You can ask yourself the questions that truly matter. What do I want? What makes me feel alive? What kind of life do I want to create? Silence can often speak louder than any external opinion. It gives room for your true desires, fears, and aspirations to surface. I once knew a woman, Ellen, who found herself at a crossroads in her career. She was a marketing executive, successful by old traditional measures, but deeply unhappy. She felt trapped, overwhelmed, and couldn't understand why. Everyone around her told her how lucky she was, how envious they were of her position. So she kept pushing through until one day she decided to take a solo camping trip, just her in the wilderness, away from screens, schedules, and social pressure. The first few days were tough. She felt anxious, her mind racing with thoughts of all the things she should be doing. But then, as she sat by a campfire, one evening, she felt a deep calm settle over her. In that quiet, she realized something profound. She didn't have to keep chasing a career that drained her just because it looked good on the outside. What she really wanted was to work with her hands to create something tangible. She remembered how much joy she found in pottery as a teenager. That realization shifted everything for her. She didn't quit her job immediately, but she started carving out time for pottery classes, eventually building a small studio. That one act of listening to herself, of acknowledging her own voice, brought her more peace and fulfillment than years of climbing the corporate ladder ever had. The process of finding your voice isn't about making drastic changes overnight. It's about taking the time to listen, really listen to what's within you. It's about recognizing when you're acting out of habit, fear, or obligation and asking yourself, is this truly what I want? It's about honoring your own thoughts and feelings, even when they don't align with what's expected or accepted. About a little bit of silence in your day. It doesn't have to be a grand retreat to a cabin in the woods. It could be as simple as waking up a bit earlier and sitting quietly with a cup of tea, or turning off the radio during your drive and letting your thoughts come and go. Notice the thoughts that surface. Pay attention to the feelings that arise. Don't judge them or try to change them. Just observe. This is where clarity begins. This is where your own voice starts to break through the noise. Finding your voice is an ongoing process. It's not something you do once and then move on from. It's a practice of consistently tuning in, of stepping away from the chatter and giving yourself space to hear your own thoughts. You may find, as you continue to do this, that your voice becomes clearer, more certain, and more confident. As that happens, you'll also notice something amazing. The more you listen to yourself, the less the opinions of others will sway you. So take that time. Give yourself the gift of your own presence. In a world that's constantly trying to pull you in 1,000 directions, learning to stay anchored in your own voice is perhaps the greatest freedom you get. It's a natural instinct, wanting to be liked, to be accepted, to fit in. That twinge of fear when we're about to express an opinion that's different, when we think about making a choice that others might not approve of, or when we consider following a dream that seems to go against the grain. This fear of judgment, of rejection, it's a powerful force. And it's often what leads us to let others control us, not because we can't make decisions on our own, but because we're terrified of what will happen if we step outside of the lines others have drawn for us. But ask yourself, what's really at stake when we let this fear take hold? Why do we care so much about the opinions of people who don't live our lives, who don't know the depth of our dreams, or the reality of our struggles? We want to belong. We want to feel valued. But here's the catch. If we spend our entire lives trying to fit into the molds others have set, we risk losing the most precious thing we have, ours. Think of some of the most admired figures in history. These are people who stood out, who faced harsh criticism and yet refused to bow to the pressure of fitting in. Look at someone like Galileo, who dared to say that the earth was not the center of the universe, even when the world condemned him for it. He wasn't praised at first. He was ridiculed, shunned, and even persecuted. Or take Martin Luther King Jr., who spoke out against injustice and faced not just criticism, but threats and violence. He chose to continue speaking his truth despite knowing the danger. And then there's someone like J.K. Rowling, who was rejected by multiple publishers before Harry Potter became a household name. Imagine if she'd let those rejections stop her. What a loss that would have been, not just for her, but for all of us who found magic in her stories. What do all these people have in common? It's not that they were fearless. Fear was very real for each of them. What set them apart was their decision to act in spite of that fear, to choose being true to themselves over being accepted. They knew that living authentically was worth more than the approval of others. Now, let's bring it back to you. Think about your own life for a moment. How many times have you held back because you were worried about what others might think? Maybe you wanted to pursue a different career, but someone close to you made a comment that wasn't practical. Or maybe you've hesitated to voice your true opinion because you feared being judged. How many times have you dimmed your own light to make others feel comfortable? We're conditioned from a young age to believe that fitting in is the way to happiness. But think about it. Is it really? Would you rather live a life where you're constantly pleasing others, always worried about maintaining a facade that's acceptable? Or would you prefer to face judgment and live a life that's truly yours? A life where you can look back and say, I was true to myself no matter what. Reality is people will judge you no matter what you do. You could follow every rule, meet every expectation, and still someone will find fault. So why let that fear dictate your choices? Why give others the power to decide what's right? Embracing discomfort, rejection, and criticism is not easy. But every time you do, you're strengthening your connection to yourself. You're proving that your voice matters more than the noise around it. Think of a time when you faced judgment or rejection. Maybe it was just something as simple as your taste in music or as significant as your choice of career. What did that feel like? Did it make you want to conform, to change, to hide that part of yourself? That's the power judgment can have when we're not careful. It makes us question our worth. But here's something to consider. Judgment is often a reflection of others' fears, not your own shortcomings. When people criticize, it's often because you're showing them something they're uncomfortable with. Maybe your courage to be different, your willingness to take risks, or your decision to stand by your values. So when you face judgment, see it as a sign that you're stepping into your own. See it as a sign that you're living authentically, that you're no longer willing to shrink yourself just to make others comfortable. Remember that every time you choose to stand up for yourself, to follow your own path, you're not just pushing through the fear of judgment. You're growing. You're becoming the person you were meant to be, the person only you can be. Think of someone like Steve Jobs. He was fired from his own company, the company he built from scratch, because he didn't fit the mold that the board wanted. Can you imagine the rejection, the judgment he must have felt? But did he let that define him? No. He took that moment and turned it into an opportunity to reflect, to grow, and to come back stronger than ever. He faced judgment and rejection head on and ultimately created something even more powerful. Or look at Oprah Winfrey. Early in her career, she was told that she wasn't fit for television. Imagine if she had let that judgment hold her back. If she had accepted others' opinions over her own, we wouldn't have the Oprah we know today. The one who broke barriers, challenged stereotypes, and built an empire based on authenticity and connection. The point is, every time you face judgment, you're at a crossroads. You can either let it push you back into a box where you're safe, it's small, or you can use it as a reminder that you're stepping into your own, that you're living a life that's aligned with your truth. Sure, it's uncomfortable. It's painful even. But that discomfort is a sign of growth, of transformation. It's proof that you're no longer living for others, but for yourself. So the next time you find yourself hesitating because you fear judgment, ask yourself, who am I really trying to please? And is the approval of others worth losing myself? More often than not, the answer will be no. The price of conforming, of silencing yourself to fit in, is far too high. Embrace the discomfort. Let rejection and judgment be your teachers, not your jailers. See each criticism as a step closer to finding your own strength, your own voice. After all, the world doesn't need more people who blend in. It needs people who are willing to stand out, who are brave enough to be themselves no matter what. That's where true freedom lies. Not in being liked by everyone, but in being fully, unapologetically yourself. Wouldn't you rather face judgment and live authentically than live a life that's a compromise, a watered-down version of who you truly are? When you start to live like this, you'll see that the people who judge and criticize aren't the ones who matter. The people who matter are the ones who are drawn to your authenticity, who respect your courage to be real. So step into that discomfort, face the judgment, use it as fuel to go deeper into who you are. Because the moment you decide that your own opinion matters more than anyone else's, you reclaim your power. You start living not for them, but for you. And that's a life worth living. You see, being true to yourself doesn't mean that you have to shut people out. It doesn't mean that you have to walk away from every relationship or live in isolation. In fact, one of the greatest strengths you can cultivate is learning how to be yourself, fully and authentically, while still maintaining meaningful connections with others, but striking a balance, a dance if you will, where you honor your own truth without disregarding the value of healthy relationships. When you choose to set boundaries, you're not distancing yourself from others. You're inviting them to see and respect the real you. And in that space, genuine, fulfilling relationships can flourish. Boundaries aren't a rejection of others. Practice them with grace, with compassion, and with the confidence that you're worth protecting. Today, we've discussed how subtle influence can shape our lives, sometimes without us even realizing it. We talked about how peer pressure, societal norms, and even the expectations of those we love can gently nudge us away. But being aware of these influences is the first step to regaining control. When you recognize what's shaping your decisions, you're no longer a passive passenger in your own life. You become the driver, steering your choices in the direction that feels right to you. And then there's the fear of judgment, of not being enough, of losing approval. But here's what I want you to take away. Fear only has as much power as you give it. The people who seem fearless, who stand firm in their truth, they aren't without fear. They've simply learned to walk alongside it. When you face that fear head on and choose to act from a place of authenticity instead, you send a powerful message to yourself and to the world that your voice, your values, and your sense of self are stronger than any opinion that might come your way. You've also heard about the importance of boundaries. Without them, it's easy to get lost, giving so much of yourself to others that you forget to leave space for your own needs and desires. Boundaries aren't walls that shut people out. They're bridges that invite healthy interaction. When you say no to others, you're actually saying yes to yourself. And that's a commitment worth making. Imagine a life where you feel safe in your own space, where you engage in relationships that uplift rather than drain, where you're confident enough to honor your needs without the weight of guilt or shame. That's the power of boundaries. Like, finally, authentically. To live authentically is not about being perfect or having everything figured out. It's about making a conscious choice to listen to your own voice, even when it's just a whisper. It's about making decisions that resonate with who you are, not who others want you to be. Authenticity doesn't mean the absence of influence or the eradication of fear. It means recognizing these things and still choosing to honor yourself. So as we come to a close, I want to leave you with a challenge. From this day forward, make one decision that is entirely your own, no matter how small it may seem. Whether it's choosing to spend an evening alone when everyone expects you to be social, or voicing an opinion you've kept silent about. Let it be yours. Just yours, free from expectation, free from fear. Take that small step and see how it feels. It might be a little uncomfortable at first, but that's okay. It's in those moments of discomfort that growth happens. With each decision you make, no matter how insignificant it may seem, you're taking one step closer to reclaiming yourself. Because the truth is, you are not here to live a life dictated by others. You are here to live a life that is unmistakably yours. So go ahead, take that first step. Make one choice that is entirely your own, and let that be the beginning of a life that reflects your true self, unshaken by the voices around you. Because the world needs you, not a reflection of everyone else's expectations, but you.